would sing. And because you are you and I am me, that means we are individually unique. Yourself is the best way to be. Love who you are, be
Morning.
you are, be you. I know there's some embarrassing, everything more clearer, cause it'll change what they see when they look in the mirror. And if you say you love yourself, are you sure? How can you love somebody that you don't know? Do you know who you are, or are you finding yourself? Are you so focused on flaws that you blinding yourself? But on yourself, you gotta be real.
She was a little nervous.
Hi, I want to welcome you to the ASU Laser brought to you by Leonardo, and my name's Pamela Winfrey. I'm the host for today, and it's my great honor to be able to present this project to everybody today, because it is truly amazing. It's called Future IDs, and it's a great example of social practice. I'm assuming that a lot of you know what social practice is because it's a great art form. And the way that I define it is that your medium is people. I don't know if that's, I think Gregory will probably correct me, but that's my shortcut. There's a couple things, at least housekeeping things. I wanted to welcome Gregory's class, which is Art and Justice, if any of you are here. I wanted to let you know that the meeting is going to be recorded. And I also would like you, if you possibly could mute yourself. At the end of, we're gonna have some conversation, and then the last 10 minutes, we'll have a Q&A, and that'll be your opportunity to ask questions of everybody. So I just wanted to introduce Gregory Sale, who is a professor at ASU. He's, I guess you could call the team leader from this amazing group. So take it away, Gregory.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to moderate today, and I'll also take that hat off and be part of the conversation that is going to unfold. I see I'm in this room a lot. I shared my my Zoom link, and my name's popping up all over the place. I want to invite anyone to go ahead and change that out and put your own name on your Zoom link. You know, today I want to welcome you all to this conversation that's about future IDs and transforming lives in immediate and necessary ways. I want to open with some questions. What does it mean to hold civic space for trauma, civic trauma? How does trauma expand from the individual to communities? How do we acknowledge this and support a process and recovery, process of recovery and healing? And this is one of the things that Future IDs at Alcatraz did, and that we'll unpack a bit today. But before we begin, it's important to acknowledge that the justice system worked yesterday. And that was a real step towards accountability, but it's also places in relief how often the system hasn't worked. So I want to ask, maybe as we get started, if we can take a moment to contemplate and process together our shared cultural trauma and resilience, because we're really about that. So there's a couple of things that how that might engage for you: the verdict from yesterday and the power of a 17-year-old with a camera and a conscience. The loss that many have experienced personally due to COVID, and that hit prisons particularly hard. And the original traumas of this country, the stolen native lands and slavery. So let's take a moment and connect in silence, in our silence. So go wherever your mind or heart leads you.
Like 21. No, 20.
Thank you all. Okay, we're gonna start out by watching a 7-minute film about Future IDs at Alcatraz to set a context for our conversation. And I'm gonna put a link in chat, so if you prefer to watch it by yourself, we'll also show it in this collective space. So let me just post that. There you go. There's a link. Then I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can't see this or hear this.
When a person is in prison, their ID, your prison ID is everything. And so the future ID would be looking beyond that ID into something that you weren't even thinking about you can dream of.
For 12 years maybe, my life total, I was just 14,854. You know, I wasn't Eli Martinez. It's important for these projects like what's happening right here today. Most people don't want to talk about incarceration because it's staying on you. But you can take that stain and make something positive out of it.
In the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, you are given one ID. If you tamper with that ID, that is a disciplinary 115 serious rules violation. But here, they define their ID because they are free.
When many of us left prison, we had an identification card that labeled us a member. And along with that member, the identity of convict, prisoner, inmate, all these other negative things was placed on us by somebody else. So to be in a space where there's the focus of reimagining your identity, it opens up a whole different dialogue.
The artists were standing by their work and people came through here and engaged them in conversation. They were in awe that this individual that spent decades in prison and came out and produced something this fantastic.
The Future Ideas at Alcatraz project is designed by and with individuals with conviction histories as they conceive and develop a vision for their future selves. Project began with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and over 4.5, 5 years has grown to a multifaceted initiative with more than 20 community partners. One of the things that the group spoke about early on was if part of the difficulty and stigma of re-entering society after incarceration is a cultural problem, what do cultural solutions look like and how could we find them together? A lot of the really powerful work that the individuals in this collective, what they were very effective at was telling their individual stories of transformation to convince elected officials that rehabilitation was possible. One of the core project collaborators, Dominic Bell, told this amazing story about being in Sacramento and meeting with a busy senator before the senator voted on a bill.
So I put out my prison ID and I put out my college ID from LMU. And he simply looked at it and was like, enough said. I think that that's important. Sometimes you don't have to say anything. You can just show them something.
Later on, when that senator voted in favor of that bill, he acknowledged that moment when he had met that young man in the hall. And so we started making ID cards. The very simple parameters that we asked was that it allude to the formal shape of an ID. And that way it would hold together visually as an exhibition. People make an ID or are invited to make an ID and make it for themselves. And then if they choose, they're also invited to donate it to the ongoing public service campaign.
Being in this space right now, I cannot help but stop and think about the individuals that were actually serving time in here. Could you imagine if they would have known one day this space was going to be used for something like this?
National Parks and Parks Conservancy has a 10-year plan for Alcatraz that talks about making the island available. Alcatraz has been designated as an international site of conscience where it preserves the kinds of past struggles of this island and as a space of reflection for human rights issues and justice issues. We've invited a lot of different groups to come in and do plays, to do performances, to have roundtable discussions. This exhibition was designed as a container for a range of activities to use the history of Alcatraz as a platform, as a springboard for some piece of work or investigation that they had. We also have Alcatraz visitors. Some days we'll have well over 1,000 people who come through the space. This may be the closest they ever get to a prison. And so we find that there's a certain poetics in that space of intersection of journeys.
Participating in this project has given me such a beautiful sense of purpose. And I know that I can use my experience to relate to others. I get to share a piece of me. I see it growing. I don't feel that sense of imprisonment here. I don't feel locked off from the rest of the Bay Area. It's come alive as an integral part of California's history.
This is 100 individuals who are making artworks about their future dreams. Embedded in them is some piece of their history, where they've been, where they're going. 1.7 million people visit Alcatraz in a year. Maybe we have 500,000 come in here. That's a lot of reflection. There's all those community groups that have done programs. Maybe we've amplified something they're doing, and then another audience, but kind of the primary audience is all the people who are still incarcerated or the people who are inside the system.
It's a bigger conversation. I think this is just a seed that we planted. But we need to see this go inside of the prisons, inside the juvenile detention centers, and get people to start to reimagine their life. Don't lose sight of who you are. Emotions are blinding, but it's all the stars. Nobody's perfect, I'm certain we are flaws. Love who you are, be you, love who you are.
Okay, while I try to figure out where that went. Thank you all. I'll turn it off in just a second.
Just can't keep an artist down, Gregory. You
No,
know?
that Maserati E, who was made some music for the film, and you were listening to him as you came into the space. Thank you, Leonardo and the Laser series for inviting us. Because you work at this intersection between art and science and art and social science, the sort of lens that we've constructed today or put forth today is to have a conversation about future ideas at Alcatraz and really consider the play between art and social work. So I want to welcome some Future Ideas collaborators, Dr. Luis Garcia, Rebecca Jackson, Emiliano Lopez, and also social work professor Jacqueline Mccroskey. Together we're gonna explore the role art can play in social work and vice versa, the role that social work can play in art. And we'll also talk just a little bit about the distinctions between the two. And finally, how this transdisciplinary work might lead to social transformation. So with that and the context of the film, I'd like to open it to you, Dr. Luis Garcia.
You need to unmute yourself there, Luis.
Myself, sorry. So yes, hello, good evening, everyone. With this project and the intersection of art and social work, if I could just put some context to from where I stand, right now I live in the LA area suburbs, and I've been a part of this project for about 4 years. I am a social worker, a clinical social worker to be precise. I'm a formerly incarcerated, justice involved, ex-con, whatever the title is. And this project, you know, coming from the social engaged art practice, social work perspective, when this project first started, I was in Gregory's ear, and I was saying, you know, I'm drawing so many, you know, parallels to my, you know, studies in social work. About 10 or 12 years ago, I think it was in 2006, I had taken a media and social work class where we actually created these 15-minute documentaries looking at communities, looking at problems in the communities. And just like Gregory referenced, you know, the person with the 17-year-old with a you know, a phone camera, you know, we were armed with you know, DVD, you know, video cameras, and our, you know, our class brought some, you know, issues to light and framed it through the lens of social workers. And as social work, you know, the hallmark of social work is clients in context of their environment. And clients is a broad term that includes communities, individuals, families, groups. So there's, you know, that core is advocacy. And, you know, with this future IDs at Alcatraz, where we landed with it, and the various public programs that we had, you know, they were from representatives from, you know, Central California, Southern California, the Bay Area. And at that, you know, from that context, you know, individuals came together and, you know, developed relationships and asked hard questions. And, you know, not everybody necessarily agreed on everything. However, you know, people did leave with like a unified sense of, you know, the intersections of how mass incarceration has impacted communities.
Luis, will you tell everyone a little bit about your ID, which was titled University of Resilience, and how you came?
Yeah, so I actually, it came, the way it came to resilience was, I had just graduated from Loyola Marymount with my doctorate in educational leadership for social justice. You know, I had to earn my MSW from USC, and when I was creating the ID, I had initially had University of Southern California, and through some various prompts, through some of the artists that had been part of the Future IDs project, I was getting challenged to kind of allow myself to really think creatively, which as a kid, you know, my goal at one time was to be a car designer, an architect. So, you know, I got out of those confines of where I was at that time in life 4 or 5 years ago. And it just kind of hit me where, you know, University of Resilience sounded a lot better. And I thought I made a mistake. And then, you know, it was, you had guided and said, you know, just change it, you know, do some things. And that, you know, but it really spoke to really, it was kind of like finding my truth. You know, as a formerly incarcerated person, you know, as a person who, you know, now is an associate clinical social worker, you know, coming from a family that, you know, I was the only person that ended up with any kind of justice system involvement, you know, actually coming from a law enforcement family. And, you know, grounded in that resilience was, grounded in my story was resilience. And my reentry system, as I said in one of the public programs, was higher education that started in my community college here after, you know, back in 1997.
Thank you, Luis. Rebecca, I wanted to know if I could invite you into the conversation and maybe talk about what it was like to walk into that room of all those big sort of mural size protest posters, IDs that were hanging in that old space on Alcatraz. What was that like, and who did you bring?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Jackson. I am here with you today. I'm with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. And what I do for my day job now is I help to run a facility that is for women, formerly incarcerated women, or women who are facing prison time to come in lieu of prison with their children in a residential setting here in San Francisco. I'm also I also come from a lot of lived experience. I spent the better half of my life going in and out of jail and prison. I come from a lot of trauma, cultural, a lot of violence. And so a lot of the women that come to Cameo House, I relate with on a very deep level because I had come through that. My best friend is an artist. And I remember I was chatting with her one day and I asked her what she was doing. She told me, I'm trying to create an ID for this art project that I'm involved in. And she began to talk to me about Gregory and this Future IDs project that was going on. She was very excited about it. And at the same time, she was telling me how hard it was, for her, that she had started her ID over like a half a dozen times. At the very start, that had me so intrigued because she isn't the type of person who isn't kind of sure of herself. And so she invited me. She invited me to come out to meet Gregory. And when the project was going up, had been put up on Alcatraz, invited me to go on to the island. Because it's about the intersection of art and justice, I asked and was allowed to bring some of the women who are part of the program that I run with me to Alcatraz. And, going onto the island itself after, I visited it. But I'll tell you, after being in prison, even still going to a place that is an old prison, it already has this like impact on a person. It can have this impact on a person. You can feel it, you could feel the history. I was very much picking up a lot of that from the women that came with me. I came with 7 or 8 women, and they could feel the energy of it too. When we walked into the room where the IDs were held, you could actually hear the women hold their breath. And their eyes were very wide. And for me too, being the first time seeing the IDs hung. And in silence, we walked through the exhibits. And I, of course, was looking for my friend's ID. I was looking at all of the IDs, but I was really looking for my friend, to see what she had decided her ID would be. And I found 2 of the women crying. Sorry. So when I asked them, I said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? I was really emotional too, but I asked them, why are you crying? Are you sad? Are you scared? And one of the women said to me, Rebecca, I want to be mom too. So she was standing in front of an ID of a woman that was her ID, that she also wanted to be a mom. And the other woman had said to me, Louise, that she wanted to graduate from the University of Resilience, that she, could see herself in that. And I found my friend's ID and I literally stayed there for 45 minutes, like looking and deeply looking into, where she had landed. And I think for the women and for myself too, it's so powerful to for 1 minute, see yourself outside of what you've always been labeled or who you've always been told that you are. To imagine that you can create that new self for you and that there aren't any limitations on what that can be. I mean, I just brought up 2 IDs, but there, every person who had an ID hanging in there could see or could wish or could hope for themselves to have a different life than the one, you know, that they had been labeled or, you know, told they were. And this is a really, really, really powerful thing. I was on Alcatraz. I can't tell you how many times at different events, and every time it was the same thing. There was the same impact. It was something that you could feel. There was a lot of emotion. And afterwards, we had a few, you know, groups. I told Gregory, we did an art group because they had to do some version of making their IDs when we got back. And those are hanging at our program in the hallway, you know, even today. But yes, I think that it's impactful, you know, for people to be able to imagine what else they can do. And it was an out of a body experience for me, also, you know, being removed from my prison self.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was amazing. I was going to ask Emiliano Lopez to go next, but I think, Emiliano, you've got a call with a state assembly member. Is that right?
Yeah, I unfortunately it got like moved from 4 to like 5:30, but this is a very important call that I don't
Go
want
do that advocacy work. That's right at our intersection. And we'll go ahead and invite Jacqueline to present, and then you can come back in.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
You've got your priorities straight, Emiliano. Go and do it for all of us. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Mccroskey. I'm a professor at the University of Southern California, Suzanne Dvorak Heck School of Social Work. That's a mouthful, but that's where I'm located in Los Angeles and at the School of Social Work. I come to this project as not a participant, but as someone who has very deep feelings about and connections to this system. Both my brothers spent a good deal of time in jail in childhood and through adulthood. I was actually recruited as a probation officer right after I finished my BA a long time ago. And I don't know what I expected to find, but it was one of the most intense and really inspiring experiences of my life. To meet these young women, these girls who were moving forward regardless of everything that had happened to them. And to try to think about how could you support them? How could you help them? I met my first social workers there, and that's what inspired me to take up social work as a profession. And it's a lifetime passion about how do we prevent entry into the incarceration system? How do we support people once they're there? And how do we help reclaim things? So when I met Gregory and learned about this project, I just had this huge appreciation for the project and what everybody here has been talking about. And in part because it sort of embodies a lot of the principles of social work, and in part because it's really different than social work. So I'm very proud to have one of my former students on this panel. And as Luis mentioned, there are a lot of principles in social work that are very much part of this discussion. So they are certainly grounded in social and racial justice, and certainly trying very hard to put the people who are closest to the action at the center of the path forward. Starting where the client is, so not starting where you think people should start, but where the client is. And this notion that we work as social workers on 3 levels, often simultaneously at the same time. One is the micro level with individuals, the meso level with groups, and the macro level with policy and systems change. So we do a lot, and we try to incorporate all of those things in an ongoing way.
but the things that we don't do are some of the things where I think art, and particularly this kind of project, a social practice kind of a project, it does so well and is so complementary, because the art can bring people together, can create intimacy and connection amongst people who were not previously connected, and do it towards strengths and towards hope and towards the future in a civic space. Social work is usually not in a civic space. It's either behind closed doors or in relatively small collections and rooms, other than when we advocate for policy change, which is what Emiliano is doing right now. And so the marriage of art and social work just has been just an absolutely fabulous experience for me to try to see it from both sides.
Thank you for that, Jacqueline. And I think that one of the things I really want to acknowledge is how deeply collaborative this project was, and some of the people that are in the Zoom room with us here, Luis Garcia, Sabrina Reed, Kern Kim, Emiliano, Rebecca, we're all core project collaborators that helped develop some of the different components. And I think the workshop, I think, is maybe the workshop that led to individual future IDs is probably the place where we get the closest to social work. But then there's also all of those community programs that we created with a wide range of organizations. And really we kind of came under, and I think we talked about it, it's talked about a bit in the video, under the auspices of the national parks and the nonprofit, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, that had sought out the designation of that site as an international site of conscience. And so what does that mean to hold a space that holds trauma? And how can that trauma and holding that history also be a springboard for healing, for processing? And so they sort of brought us on board because we were art and we had a little more liberty than they had as a national organization or agency during the Trump administration, right? Or for any time to really explore that. And so in some ways it gave them a little bit of distance, and then we had a whole infrastructure. Essentially, I really see this, that we built a mechanism and we really tried to refine that mechanism. One aspect was that before every public program, and I thought about saying it today, Rebecca talked about some of the kind of trauma that could come up for people just being on the island who had been incarcerated, who had loved ones who'd been incarcerated. And we had these amazing deep programs about families and separation. And for some people that was so transformative and cathartic, but it also could be triggering for others. So how do we create a mechanism that can hold that complexity, but also be safe? So we created a separate space in our big factory building that was a space for processing and reflection. And at the beginning of every program, we said to people, things may come up today. We invite you to lean into the discomfort, but we also invite you to be our partner in making certain that you are safe. Mm-hmm. And so it was really thinking those through, and it was some of the people who have more professional training than I do as an artist, or that some of the other cultural producers on our team had, like Luis, who really helped, and Rebecca and Sabrina, who really helped us shape and form those things.
I think I would just like to add also that I think the exhibit itself, the IDs themselves, were sort of the foundation of where the art came from. But going on the island several times throughout the year, like I said, and being part of different projects, what was interesting is that I found that the space created a space where different forms of art could also come out and be expressed. So it wasn't just like art, painting or pictures or like a sculpture. It wasn't art only in that way. It was also, beautiful sort of like spoken words. It was beautiful, like acting, it was, you know, and I think that is also really powerful, you know, that it was different forms of art came, there was different forms of expression. A lot of the events, they were different. Do you know what I'm saying? So there was space for everyone and what art meant for them. And I think that was really powerful. And I just want to say that in the video, one of the speakers, and I can't remember who says this, she says how important it is to bring this project inside. Because, you know, yes, I think that we need to talk about that more. We need to, you know, see about how we can make that happen, because everything that we're talking about, all these beautiful things that we saw happen in this space could happen in those spaces too, for the people that are still incarcerated and can't see, you know, that need a space to create and to imagine, you know, like the project, you know, did for so many people on the island. It's a beautiful thing.
It feels too that, you know, life in prison is, you're so invisible. I mean, most people, it comes up in the film where they say most people, you know, may never experience prison. But I feel like that's one of the problems, is because people are so invisible. Everybody else out here, we don't know what's going on. We have no idea who people are there. And I think that the ID project clearly gave people a place, you know, like a place in people's hearts. It gave them a face. And that to me was an incredibly powerful part of this project, and it clearly had amazing impact. Yeah.
The other piece that's so interesting in Gregory was talking about civic trauma. So incredibly impactful for everyone directly involved. And you had thousands of tourists who walked by or through or looked around and said, what are these IDs doing here? And who are those people who are having that conversation? Which another side, Pamela, of the it's so closed. It's closed in terms of, you know, individuals may not recognize each other, but also the public. I mean, what do we make of that? How do we behave when we're exposed to something that's such a new and different way of thinking about Alcatraz? You know, it's not all Al Capone. It's actually people like you and me, and we're, you know, talking about and learning from each other and sort of moving forward with our futures.
Luis or Sabrina or Kern, do you want to kind of take that ball and run with it, that line?
I would. Can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you. So it's interesting because I had gone to the Ai Weiwei exhibit that was prior, the exhibit was up for a year prior to us being up, and I hadn't, of course I had no idea this was happening. And I remember sitting in this, they had an interactive portion of the exhibit where you wrote a postcard to a political prisoner somewhere in the world. And I was sitting there next to a family who was from Kansas or, you know, some other state. It was a mom and a dad and 2 kids. And I remember listening, and one of the kids said, "Mom, what's prison?" And I remember just watching her kind of like, you know, go through what to say. And I don't remember what she said, but I remember thinking, wow, how impactful this was, that just that alone, you know, that conversation happened. It probably never would have come up before, but that she had a chance to explain it in this environment. And that stuck with me for a long time. And when we got the chance to be on Treasure or Alcatraz, I thought, that's it. That's the most important part for me. The most important part for me was the people that were going to see it. It's not thousands, it's 1.5 million people go through Alcatraz. You know, so that kind of exposure and that kind of opportunity for people to start, even whatever their opinion is, you know, just a conversation happening. And just watching them go through each time and kind of hearing their conversations amongst themselves was really awesome.
I think I will just add one last thing. It's just also a little story, but my partner of 14 years, he's actually never been in prison. But he had, come to the island with me twice. And we were sitting just at home talking, and he looked at me and he said, can't I make an ID too? And I remember thinking to myself, wait a second. I think I even joked with him, but you've never been locked up. You've never been in prison. And he checked me and he said, you're wrong. He said, I was imprisoned in my own mind my whole childhood. And I was in my own sort of, he was in his own sort of prison, even if he wasn't behind walls. And then that made my head explode, because I say, well, what, that has got to be very true. What about people who are, imprisoned from maybe like their mental health, or they're imprisoned in a violent relationship? I started thinking about all these things, and I say to myself, wow, like we can't even assume that just because a person has never been locked up, that they don't feel that they have, their souls have been in some type of prison, and that they need or want or would love an opportunity to see themselves as a different identification of who they have been told they are. You know what I mean? And so I noticed that as a second wave, of how something like a project like this could impact society and families and friends,
Expanding on what Rebecca just said, one of the community groups that came through Alcatraz, one of the ladies that was in the group, she teaches inner city youth, for a weekend program, and she actually adapted the future IDs concept to work with these youth, because they're being taught through the way that the education system is structured and the way that law enforcement is treating them, to basically to believe that they have these predetermined roles in their life, in their future. And so she used the future IDs process to really help them see beyond what people were telling them their future was going to be, and try to redefine where they would like to be. Because it's the crazy thing is, what's happened today in school is, you've heard the criticism, the imagination is gone. People are so stuck on teaching to the test, and teachers worried about tenure to make sure that so that these kids who pass their graduation requirements, that the creativity is gone. And so it's like the system is churning out children without a view of life outside of what is being dictated for them. And something I wanted to bring up about the original question was, my parents came out to Alcatraz, and as much as my mom knew, knowing me, thinking, not everyone looks the part, she ended up sitting next to a guy in one of the workshops, and this guy, it turns out he was a former life without, a person with life without, and got out after 35 years, and she didn't even realize that. And even for someone, with a child who lived through the justice system, she still had some barriers to overcome, realizing, that there is so much more to, the story than meets the eye. And so I can't imagine what the impact is for someone who hasn't lived through that, especially being able to see people who lived through it. I mean, I had a really powerful moment in one of our weekends where we had a group of students come through, and they realized just how much time people spent incarcerated. In some cases it was longer than their time on earth. And so that had a really huge impact on a lot of people.
Thank you, Karen. Emiliano's back, and I was wondering, Emiliano, because you work quite a bit with the GRIP, the Guiding Rage into Power program, and also because of your own journey with this project and your advocacy work. What would you like to contribute, and maybe thinking through this lens of social work and art, or wherever you want?
Yeah, you know, like this project was really, really important to me, not because it was an art project, but because of what it meant, because I was coming out and re-entering a society after 13 years of incarceration. 13 years of creating an identity for myself surrounded by walls and electric fences and around a bunch of men. I came out into a community where there's women, where there's men, where there's people that are talking to me, and I had no idea who I was or who I was to become. So when we went through this process of creating this ID, now I'm reimagining like who I could be. You know, this is not just re-entry, but re-identification. And that's been my sole purpose, is to identify like who I am in the community. And since Future IDs, you know, I created, my ID was called Connected Communities, and in Spanish it's Comunidades Conectadas. And it's in honor of all of the disconnection that exists in all of our communities. Like even now, I mean, we see the disconnection in this country where, you know, they fight for human rights all over the world, and in this country we're incarcerating children.
Right.
You know, and that's like, we're not seeing that. You know, we're paying, as taxpayers, we pay into that. And how does that make me feel to know my tax dollars are going into a cage for a child? So I wanted to bring that full circle. And, you know, with the work that I do at GRIP, which is Guiding Rage into Power, it's a 52-week program where I get to go back into the institution where I paroled from to help people, you know, rediscover who they really are. 52 weeks to tap into who they are, who they were, and who they lost, and how to regain that person, which is a magical experience, because in 52 weeks you see a person change and really connect with themselves, just as I did when I went through the program. And as I come out, you know, and I'm doing this work and I'm experiencing life out here, now I see that there's opportunities for me, and there's things that are lost that only I can see through the lens that I see as a formerly incarcerated person, experiencing parole, identifying, you know, what that relationship is, and then doing research around it, and knowing that there is no transparency in the parole process. You know, I took on, you know, a small part with some volunteers where we created an app to create a crowdsourced environment for people to anonymously rate their parole agent. So they know who they're dealing with at any given moment. And I'm hoping that rolls out in the summertime. But no one's examining what those relationships looks like. The relationship between a parole officer and a person on parole. The relationship between someone incarcerated and their community, because, you know, there's this like line, this imaginary line that just divides everybody and doesn't really bring true connection. So I hope I was able to answer your question.
Yeah,
Greg.
you did great. And I just love the way agency, well, you're growing your own agency in these different ways. I wanted to maybe make one final point about a distinction between art and social work. And then maybe we can open it up to questions or other comments for people who are involved. A big distinction I see is that art is able to operate in this sort of symbolic space, this sort of social, cultural, and political space. And, you know, really even just engaging with the island that's known for the worst of the worst, the island that's also known for the birth of the Red Power movement, right? With the Native American occupation. Those were two histories that we conceptually engaged in over that 12 months and worked and really helped set it up as national parks so that they could continue to do this work with different types of system-involved communities. But it's that symbolic space, that sort of free agent space that art can enter, that social work can't, or not as easily, that I think was really important. So maybe with that one point, I want to open it up to questions, or to anyone else who is intimately involved or whatever, who has something they want to put on the table. Anne, should I see your hand up?
Hi everyone, I feel very lucky to be here. I'm been an observer and a fan of the project since 2016, and was able to come over to the last Arts and Justice Summit. But and now working with Gregory and the cohort in the Justice and Arts group, which is amazing. But yeah, what I find so exciting about Future IDs is that the accessibility of it, and the vehicle as art, as a way for people to enter the conversation. You know, it's such a technical, sort of traumatic, overwhelming conversation, but yeah, yeah, and this, like, as a symbolic space, you know, how loaded Alcatraz was, how the objectivity of the space, you know, went all the way through to the conceptual meaning of the work. But yeah, I'm really excited to be involved.
Thank you. I wanted to call on Carol Newberg, if you're there. I would love, I mean, wow, this project wouldn't have happened without you.
Oh, yes, I'll take all the credit for this, Gregory. I hardly saw anybody else working for years on it. It was incredible. I mean, we were so lucky to be able to participate, and it meant a lot to all the guys that were able to, and the ones that were able to actually come and see it. It's been incredible.
Carol, will you tell everybody quickly who those guys are and how you're connected to them, and how it sort of helped us see a pathway to get to Alcatraz?
Yeah, sure. Gregory reached out. I'm the program manager at San Quentin Prison Arts Project, so part of what's now called Transformative Arts, or Arts and Corrections. And so we have a studio there, and it's been there since 1980, and very vital, always growing art program, music, theater, but the visual arts have always been really strong there. So when Gregory reached out and came to visit, the project was, the first time was still in formation. And I think you shared what you'd been doing, your other social practice work, and got feedback. But then the next time you came with the actual, like, here's the ID proposal. And actually it was a little crazy getting that into prison the first time, and getting the work out was even harder. But it was a wonderful experience. And I think even right then, I heard someone talking about this, you know, we were all saying, you know, this could be for everybody, you know, for people on the outside, for people going through different changes. It gives you so much. So the men really responded to it and did a tremendous variety of the answer, you know, how they saw themselves, from really practical things to really, you know, slightly wild in the future stuff. It just gave so much room for everybody to work in whatever way they wanted. I loved how open the format was, really. And you know, what it grew into at the big blown up versions of the pieces, no one knew that was all coming. So it meant a great deal. And we were so glad some of the men that had been inside were able to come, one or two were able to speak at your different programs, and people were able to just come see it. So thank you. You can come back anytime.
Thank you, Carol.
As soon as we open.
I think we're close to time, and I wanted to maybe just ask Louise, Jacqueline, Emiliano, Rebecca, if there was any final comments you wanted to make.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of circle back on which kind of is looking forward, on the comment from the film when Dolores Canales had talked about, you know, taking this back inside, and even back onto I would also add onto the university campuses, because right now in California, not only do we have the programming that goes inside, we also have, it's an unprecedented time with the amount of higher education programs that are in the prison and those that are coming home that are supported through projects such as like Project Rebound in the CSU system, and some of the private colleges, private universities are, providing support to formerly incarcerated. So, when the future IDs is looking to your past and then looking to your present, and from my journey in it, and I look back at the Alcatraz period, it was like every time was like a chipping away at the trauma, and the resentments that I had. It was like I was assaulted in prison, and I couldn't say anything to anybody because it would have marked me, and so I had to stay quiet, and that led to a lot of anger towards myself, anger, through this journey, through this future IDs, and I look at the the resilience symbol that I used, it was like standing on the ancestors of my father's side and my mom's side. And when growing up, my father passed away during this project, and one of the things always was the right to self-determination as a Chicano on stolen land, this American Southwest, we used to be part of Mexico. And early on in my youth, I challenged that. I didn't necessarily, I didn't agree with him to the extent that, now I saw where as I got older, I saw where he was going, where it landed, what it meant and how it meant. And, we have an immigration crisis in this country, and Mexicans and other people from, Central America or, the East have to deal with being dehumanized. But I would stand on, my ID, and I see, the level of historical traumas and how it intersects in people's beliefs about what they can achieve in life. And, taking it back in creates hope and, imagination, and bringing it back, bringing it to a college campus where you're allowed to imagine, you can't go to can't go to a university without imagining, you hopefully get this job or something like that. So, the potential is there in so many, areas beyond, the simple, the jails and prisons, which, this is, I think, part of the growth of future IDs and for the future, where, it gives that person the opportunity to dream and to imagine and see, through others that paved the way, where their lives can be.
Thank you, Luis. I think I'm going to make one final closing comment, and then I think we need to pass it over to Pam to stay on time. We just wanted to say that Arizona State University, through the School of Art and the Herberger Institute, and now through Institute for Humanities Research, is supporting this work so that system impacted individuals who've been part of this project can now join us at ASU. And there are 7 community justice scholars / learners on this call, who are also part of the art and justice course. And they all receive honorariums from the university, like as hired advisors to be part of this learning space and with ASU students. And so it's the Art and Justice Leadership Cohort. And so I just wanted to acknowledge them and some of our institutional support. So with that, thank you all. There's probably more questions, but contact me and we'll turn it back to Pamela.
Yeah, I wanted to thank the panelists the work is just so beautiful and so topical and so needed. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I want to thank the audience for coming, because I also felt like we had sort of formed a little community for an hour, which is always a good thing, right? Alyssa Henning, thank you for all of your great work as usual. You keep us running. And Diana Ayton-Shanker, who's the director of Leonardo, who's part of this audience here. I want to let people know that May 13th at 10 a.m. we are having our last one for the season. It's called Solving Wicked Problems, which I figure could have been the title for this one as well, which will feature Jonathan Keats, Stacey Kay, and Julian Bleeker. And I also wanted to say, you know, at this very moment, was something that Rebecca said, and it made me feel very good, because I realized we should all take this opportunity to think about our new IDs going forward. We're in this incredible moment where change could happen. So thank you all for coming, and I hope I see you again.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. If you're in my class, join us at 6:15.